Hey, my name's Shanshan. I sell art on shanshan.co. Today we're going to review The Last Duel. So it's a film by Ridley Scott, the same director as Alien. Time is 2 hours, 32 minutes, so quite a long time. Don't drink a Coke before you go in. I didn't, so I was good. I can imagine people are probably suffering though. You have Matt Damon as Sir Jean de Carrouges. Adam Driver is Jacques de Gris. Jodie Comer plays Marguerite de Carrouges. Harriet Walter plays Niolce de Carrouges. Ben Affleck plays Pierre de Lancôme. So it's a story of a young bride. Her husband's away out of town doing a battle, and her mother-in-law takes all the staff with her, so she's all alone, locked up in the castle. A guy shows up. She's like, "Well, I know this guy." She opens the door, and then behind him is this other squire or knight. He wants to seduce her. He thinks he loves her, and he's totally infatuated with her, and he thinks she feels the same. And then he goes ahead and rapes her. So her husband comes home, tries to figure out what's up with the wife, and then turns out, she tells him the story, and then they go from there, and then it ends up in a duel between the two, Squire and Sir Jean. So what they do is they split the tale into three different versions of Sir Jean, Jacques de Gris, and Marguerite. So you have the three different tale of the tales. So it's kind of basically a Me Too movement for the medieval age, right? It's interesting to see how women are really under the thumb of the males here. You could see in a very hierarchical, patriarchal society where the men go to battle and fight all these battles, and women just kind of get married, create children, and that's kind of it. So it's really interesting. Another thing is they have kind of the construction of Notre Dame just starting to rise, which is interesting because Notre Dame recently burned. I think it was 2-3 years ago, so it's a nice callback to see Notre Dame kind of being reconstructed. So symbolically in the film, they're redoing it. You have great costumes and sets to make early medieval Paris come alive with the courtyard and the forest scenes by the bridges and the castles, and all that kind of really plays into this medieval feel. And Europe obviously has a lot of these castles still left. Luckily, they didn't destroy them in World War II or World War I, so there's a lot of this they can kind of go to and really use to create this story. So it really creates this really strong sets, I would say. It's interesting because there's flaws in all the characters. So in Sir Jean, he has kind of this national pride, and his father was more of a political creature and was able to kind of navigate the waters between the king and then this guy Pierre, who's in between, and then he's a kind of a squire level, so it's a different level. And his father was kind of able to kind of navigate those waters successfully, but Sir Jean is kind of blunt-headed, pig-headed, is very arrogant in his name. He's very prideful himself. He doesn't really think very politically astute on how to kind of win people over. He doesn't really know that. And it really ends up biting him in the butt twice, where he loses the lands for his bride is given away without his permission, kind of last second. He's like, what the hell is this? So he feels that's a slight against his honor. And then later, he doesn't inherit the captaincy, so it's a further slight against him with this Pierre guy. The benefactor is Jacques de Gris. So, he really has a vendetta kind of against Jacques de Gris anyway. He kind of hates the guy. So when the rape happens later, he's just like, let's finish this guy, right? So there's a great build up there. You have also Jacques Gris. He comes from nowhere. He's basically he was studying to be a priest, and then he decided, I think he liked women. So he decided to go and study as a squire, and he was able to smooth talk his way into the good hands of Pierre, and able to start. He volunteers because he knows how to do math and budget numbers. So he's like, hey, I'm suffering, I can't get all this money out of these nobles, so can you go and help? So he starts breaking heads, kind of smashing pieces together, gets all the money together. But he's not so harsh on his friend Sir Jean. But Sir Jean kind of feels bitter about it as well. Like, he's being hassled by this lord for all this cash he really doesn't have. Everyone's having a hard harvest. So Jacques is slowly rising up the ranks of this middle layer that, John reports into, and John doesn't realize kind of the political dynamics between him and the king and that guy. So it's really interesting. And Jacques, where he hangs around Pierre. Pierre has his wife, he's pregnant, but there's these ladies of his court, and he just fucks them all the time. So he's like 3-4 girls at once, and he pulls in his nice squire, Jacques de Gris, and says, hey, you want to have some fun with me? He's like, okay, whatever. So Jacques de Gris has this really big head on his shoulders of being able to seduce women and get any woman he wants. And really, it's just kind of exaggerated because he has this pull with this guy. If he didn't wasn't working directly on this guy, he would have no pull. So he's kind of, mistaken his position for how much power he has over women, which then he gets the idea of being infatuated with Sir Jean's wife, Marguerite, and obviously that leads him astray. I think there could have been a little bit more lines between Marguerite and Jacques to kind of build up not the seduction, obviously he rapes her, but the pre-seduction was when they were just talking, kind of back and forth. That would have been more dimensional why he becomes infatuated with her. It's not really clear cut that, yeah, they're kind of flirting a little bit, but why would he be so deeply infatuated later? I think you could have added a couple shots in there. Cut back some of the battle scenes maybe and just add a little bit more of why he's infatuated and all this to build up that set. Otherwise, the rape just kind of comes out of nowhere and you're just like, what is this? Obviously for Marguerite, it comes out of nowhere, but for Jacques, it would have been nice to kind of see how he gets infatuated with it. It mmade more sense. The other thing is, like, Marguerite's friend kind of betrays her by saying, oh, they were both ogling Jacques, so is it really a rape? And so that her honor's kind of brought into question and all that. So that's kind of an interesting twist. And it would make sense if they were both single women kind of competing to get married, but they're already married, so why would they be competing against each other? But, women tend to kind of infight sometimes that way, so maybe that makes sense. And the weird thing is they start the movie kind of the beginning of the duel, and then they cut and say like, oh, why did the duel happen, kind of in the 3 parts version, right? I don't know if you really need to do it this way. I think what I would do is start off with Sir Jean and Jacques riding around in a battle. They could just be discussing like this last duel, like similar how Quentin Tarantino has a long dialogue scenes. They could have done a long dialogue scene here where they're discussing this brutal duel, maybe 50 years ago, 30 years ago, who knows what. And they could talk about, oh man, can you imagine what this guy did? And they got this happened to them. And oh my God, why did that happen? He cut his balls off or who knows what. And just be discussing this horrible duel. And so when the duel happens later, you're like, holy crap, there's going to be this horrible duel. You imagine the worst things possible. But since you don't know what's going to be in the duel going into it, there's kind of like a lack of suspense buildup, I think. And by talking about the duel in the beginning, I think that would have been more effective than showing the duel and then repeat it later. It's just more effective, I think, that way. Another thing I would have liked to see is between Pierre and the king. You don't really see how that relationship works. You see a little bit as far as when Sir Jean kind of challenges Pierre and goes around him to the king, but you don't really see the drama between the king and Pierre, and that would have been kind of nice to see how that functions, because you could have seen why Pierre is afraid to go to the king and all this stuff. Obviously, relationship wise he would be, but if they would have kind of explained it more like, oh, the king cracked down on this guy, can you believe this happened, oh my God, we got to watch our step. So that would have been interesting if he kind of been debating that behind the scenes with someone. That would have shown the seriousness of squaring off against the king and screwing around with the king, and you don't really have that. It's kind of missing in the plot. I don't think you'd have to do too much film, maybe a 2-minute shot on that. This seems like there's several different titles of The Last Duel. Every 10 years it seems they do some kind of reboot in different countries and all over the world. I don't know if they're the same story, but it seems like they're retelling the same tale again. The same thing happens with Robin Hood. They redo Robin Hood, like every 10 years is a different version of Robin Hood. Kevin Costner. I just saw one like 2 years ago maybe. And they just redo these over and over and over and over and over and over again. And it's just like, oh man, you're really tiring the audience out. 10 years I guess is a good break because most people aren't going to go back and see old films. So the newer audience probably isn't going to go see the old Robin Hoods or even know they exist. And see them later and be like, what the hell is this? Who's this other guy, Similar to the Batman, I don't think the younger generations are going to see the Batman I saw in the early 90s, right? So I guess you can repeat those stories, but it kind of gets boring. It gets very tired, especially with Robin Hood. This story has that kind of same feel where it's this classical face-off between 2 knights and one of them rapes his friend's wife and all this stuff. So it seems like a very predictable tale. So I don't know how well the story is going to do because audiences tend to get tired of these kind of tales. But it is kind of a pretty interesting thing. I think they did a pretty good job with it. I'd recommend it. I don't know if you're going to see it multiple times. So give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, you can subscribe below, and I'll see you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.